So I would say somewhere in the middle. I think one of the biggest challenges with the growth camp, let's say the Kathy Woods camp, is that a couple things. One is we've had this kind of exponential growth from Moore's law, right? So semiconductors keep getting more and more efficient, and then software has absolutely blossomed for decades. The internet, and then mobile internet, and then all the applications we built, and so that's been a very exponential area of growth. And I think it's a mistake when people apply that logic to hardware, especially coming from an engineering background. I just know there's so many more constraints for things in the real world. And an example I like to point out is that the fastest passenger jet was built in 1969. And we still haven't built a faster one, right? So we're 50 years later. People back then thought by now we would look like the Jetsons, and we can't do it with what they did back then. The fastest manned military jet was the Blackbird. That was also like 50 years ago, 60 years ago. I forget the exact date. United States went through a period where we stopped the shuttle program but we delayed the next one. And so we had a 9-year period where we had to pay the Russians to bring American astronauts into space for the International Space Station because we couldn't really do it. And so hardware and things like that tend to not be as exponential as people suspect. And I'm also watching the commodity shortages, kind of the structural shortages as it relates to copper, nickel, even oil and gas to some extent, compared to the estimates that they're going to be using in, say, 2030. And so I think we're going to be running into some, commodity constraints along the way to some of those visions of the future. And so I think that's a challenge. Also, I think a lot, especially earlier this year, a lot of like the ARC kind of Kathy Wood type of investments were very, very expensive. She had tremendous performance, partly because they went up very, very high, both in terms of growth, but also valuation on that growth. And so this year we've seen a big cooling off of valuation, even though ironically they're still high compared to traditional valuation metrics. So they're still pricing in a tremendous amount of growth, even though it's perhaps less bubbly than it was before. So actually some of those names are perhaps more attractive now. I think some of the ARC growth stocks could do pretty well next year or 2 years. So I share some views with her, but I'm a lot more cautious about things that apply to hardware. And when it comes to Burry, I do think that most assets are bubble-like. I do think that the S&P 500 is unlikely to have great returns over, say, the next 10 years. I think some of the Nasdaq stocks, again, I think they're very, very expensive. I think bonds are overvalued. It kind of goes into the whole cash is trash thing. I think basically bonds, their yields are below the inflation rate. I think that if you hold bonds for the next 10 years, you're not likely to do very well in terms of purchasing power terms. Real estate in many countries is very, very expensive. In the U.S., it's less of a bubble than elsewhere, perhaps, but it's still expensive. And so I do think that there is, kind of an idea of an everything bubble. I think also the meme stocks and some of the cryptos have been very bubble-like, and that they're pro. In any given crypto cycle, 99% of that stuff ends up not really making it to the next cycle, right? It's kind of this, we throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And there's only a small percentage of things that stick. So I think there will be things that 5 years from now are far, far more valuable than they are now. But I think a lot of them will likely not be. And so the areas that I would say are not bubbles are things like healthcare stocks, again, basically some of the value stocks, but specifically value sectors that are not being heavily disrupted. Things that are just kind of cheap and not being heavily disrupted, and they just be kind of not exciting, right? So I think that that's the stuff that could kind of grind out better returns over a 5 to 10 year period compared to what people think. Whereas some of the really exciting stuff I think could stagnate. Now, I think that there's still exciting stuff, like whether it's Bitcoin or whether it's certain other things in the digital asset ecosystem. I still think they're going to do very well over a 10-year period, most likely. But I do think we're entering a period where people have to be pretty selective with what they own.
So when it comes to market crashes, how likely do you think it's going to be that there'll be a big crash in financial markets next year? And also, how do you prepare for them?
So the chance of it is higher than 2021, but it still wouldn't be my base case. I mean, my base case would be kind of choppy consolidation. I don't know if we're going to go to higher highs or if we're going to, just kind of stagnate. We could have a drawdown. Basically, when you have such a strong year, and then you have a pullback of fiscal monetary support, that can put some pressure on markets. And so a crash would not be my base case, but weaker market conditions would be. The ways to protect against it are to own some cash or bonds as a non-zero position so they can rebalance into the weakness of things you want to own.
Before we continue, help us clicking that YouTube like button and subscribe now to our channel. This shows the algorithm that you valued this information. And it helps us spread that message. Sharing is caring. And now, let's continue.
I have bad news for you. If you're not rich by now, you're screwed. And if you're in debt, you're even double screwed. How so, you might wonder? Well, the sad truth is that you're working your whole life to make someone else rich. The mega corporations, the banks, the politicians, everyone is getting richer. They get your money. And what is even worse, they get your time, they get your life. You are not even in a rat race. You're in a financial prison. But what could a solution for you look like? Honestly, I don't know, but I know what a solution for me would look like. It's very simple. I use whatever money I have and I multiply it with 1,000. This could make my life much easier and probably yours as well. If you have $1,000 available and multiply this with 1,000, I believe that this could solve some financial issue for the one or the other. Of course, if you're ugly, you would have to multiply it with much more than 1,000. My name is Markus Dahn, and this is what I decided to do. I decided to 1000x my money. This is not a joke. I know what you may be thinking. What is this guy talking about? How should this work? This is not possible. Well, I made a detailed video where I laid out my plan. And some clever folks might even want to look at this plan and copy it and do exactly what I do. This is just a little hint on the side. You have two options. You leave, you forget what you have seen. You do whatever you're doing and you hope that somehow you get some other results. Good luck with that. Or you click the link below the video. You enter your email address because I'm not showing this to everybody. You at least watch my video on how I plan to 1000x my money. The choice is yours. Make the right choice. Join me. See what a different future you could have. See at least how I plan to do the 1000x. So click on the link below, enter your email address, and I see you on the other side. Your Markus Dahn.